See. She had built a company from nothing, signed contracts worth millions, and never once let anyone see her cry. But on the morning of her 32nd birthday, Sophia Bennett sat alone in a wheelchair inside a bakery she couldn't afford, holding a single crumpled dollar bill, staring at a cake she would never buy. And for the first time in years, she had absolutely no idea what came next. One stranger was about to walk through that door. One small, unremarkable act of kindness was about to change everything. This is the story of how rock bottom became the foundation. Don't forget to hit like and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The bakery was called Sweet & Co., and it sat on the corner of Maple and Fifth like it had always been there, like the city had grown up around it instead of the other way around. The front window was enormous, the kind of glass that caught morning light and scattered it across the sidewalk in warm, honey-colored pieces. And the display inside was something out of a dream. 3-tier cakes with sugar roses, cupcakes in shades of lavender and cream, a birthday cake near the center of the case, white fondant with gold lettering, a single candle already waiting in its holder, like someone had placed it there just for this moment. Sophia Bennett did not believe in signs. She hadn't in a long time. She pushed through the front door at 9:47 in the morning, the wheelchair's front wheels catching briefly on the threshold before she jerked them free with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd stopped being embarrassed about that particular obstacle. The bell above the door chimed. A girl behind the counter, 19, maybe 20, wearing a pink apron dusted with flour, looked up and offered the automatic smile of someone trained to do so. "Good morning. Welcome to Sweet & Co." "Morning," Sophia said. She didn't smile back, not because she was rude, she wasn't, or at least she hadn't always been, but because smiling required a certain amount of energy she wasn't sure she had left to spend. She wheeled slowly toward the display case, her hands moving in short, controlled rotations, and stopped in front of the glass. The cakes looked back at her. She looked at the price tag under the white fondant birthday cake. $38. She reached into the small canvas bag hanging from the back handle of her chair and pulled out her wallet. She already knew what was in it. She'd checked twice this morning, sitting at the edge of her air mattress in the apartment she was 3 weeks behind on. The apartment that smelled like damp carpet and someone else's cooking from the unit below. She'd counted it in the gray early morning light before she'd even had coffee. $1. One crumpled, soft-edged dollar bill that had been at the bottom of her bag so long it had taken on the texture of old fabric. She unfolded it now and smoothed it against her thigh. $38 for a birthday cake. She had one. Sophia didn't move for a long moment. She just sat there with the bill in her hand, looking at the cake, at the little gold candle waiting to be lit, and tried to remember the last time she'd felt like anything other than a problem someone else had already solved for the worse. 2 years ago, she'd been someone. That wasn't self-pity talking. It was just fact. Bennett Digital Solutions had offices in Chicago and a satellite team in Austin. She'd started it at 26 with a used laptop and a Dropbox account and a client list she'd built cold calling small business owners from a spreadsheet she'd made herself. By 29, she had 30 employees, a lease on real office space, and a feature in a regional business magazine with a photo she'd never quite liked. She was smiling too wide in it, like she'd been nervous, which she had been. She hadn't been born into money. She hadn't gone to the right schools or known the right people. She had worked with the specific, grinding dedication of someone who understands that no one is coming to save them, and she had built something real. And then Marcus Hale had walked into her life, and she had made the worst business decision she would ever make, which was trusting him. He'd come in as a silent investor. That was how he'd introduced himself. Silent, which she'd later understand was his way of telling her exactly what he was without her recognizing it. He had the kind of easy confidence that came from never having been truly at risk. The kind of man who smiled at waitstaff and remembered their names and left good tips. The kind of man who made you feel, in his presence, that you had been slightly underestimating yourself your whole life, and he was the first person to finally see you clearly. She'd signed the partnership agreement on a Thursday. By the following spring, Bennett Digital Solutions no longer existed in any form she recognized. It wasn't dramatic. That was what nobody told you about financial ruin. It wasn't dramatic. It was administrative. It was emails you couldn't answer and phone calls you started dreading before they happened, and a creeping, widening gap between what you needed and what you had that grew so gradually you kept thinking you'd stopped it until the day you realized you hadn't stopped anything. You'd just been watching it happen in slow motion. The company collapsed, the employees scattered, the office lease expired and wasn't renewed. Marcus Hale moved on to whatever came next for men like him, leaving behind a paperwork architecture so carefully constructed that her lawyers spent 4 months trying to find something actionable and came back with nothing. He hadn't broken any laws. He'd just broken her. And then there was the accident. Porto. She hadn't been drinking. She said that to herself sometimes now, not for anyone else's benefit, but her own. Because the story that had spread through the small professional community she'd once belonged to had a different shape, and she knew it. The truth was that she'd been driving on 2 hours of sleep after a meeting with her remaining investors had gone badly, and she'd run a red light she hadn't seen, and the delivery truck that T-boned her passenger side had done exactly as much damage as physics suggested it would. She'd woken up 2 days later in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, with her left leg held together by hardware and her right leg uncertain in ways the doctors were careful not to be too specific about yet. They were specific eventually. The specificity involved words like permanent and adaptive mobility, and a pamphlet about wheelchair models that a nurse had left on her bedside table with the specific gentleness of someone delivering news they hadn't caused but still somehow felt responsible for. She was 31 years old, and she had lost, in the span of 18 months, her business, her savings, her professional reputation, and the use of her legs. She had not cried in the hospital. She'd been too tired. She'd cried in the parking lot of the rehabilitation center on the day they discharged her, sitting in the chair for only the 3rd week, in the cold gray drizzle, waiting for the car service she'd booked because there was no one to call. She'd cried hard and fast, and then she'd stopped because the car had pulled up and she'd needed to figure out how to get into it. That was the thing about surviving bad things. You just kept having to figure out how to get into the next car. Well, today was her birthday. 32 years old, sitting in a bakery she'd wandered into because she'd wheeled, past it 3 times in the last week, and something about the light through the window had made her think, just once, just for 10 minutes, I want to sit somewhere that feels like things are okay. She hadn't planned to buy anything. She'd told herself she was just going to sit, have a coffee, maybe if the small bills in her bag stretched to it, and let the warmth and the smell of sugar do what warmth and the smell of sugar do. But then she'd seen the birthday cake, and now she was sitting here with a dollar bill in her hand like some kind of punchline. The girl behind the counter, the one with the flour-dusted apron whose name tag said Kelly in block letters, was trying very hard not to look at her. Sophia could feel it. That particular kind of careful non-looking that people did when they'd noticed something and were being polite about it. She folded the dollar back up, put it in her lap, looked at the cake for another moment. Happy birthday, Sophia, she thought. You're really killing it. She turned the chair toward the small cluster of tables near the window. 4 little round ones with wooden chairs, only one of them occupied by an older man reading a newspaper, and wheeled herself to the one with the best light. She sat down. She looked out at the street. A mom pushed a stroller past the window. 2 teenagers on bikes. A woman in a yellow coat walking a small white dog. The world going about its morning like nothing unusual was happening. She put both hands flat on the table and stared at them. Her hands, at least, still worked. They'd always been one of the things she'd liked about herself. Strong hands, capable, good for typing, for carrying things, for doing things. She was going to start over. She'd decided this. She was going to rebuild, in some form, some version of what she'd had, because she didn't know how not to. She had a laptop. She had a storage unit with 3 boxes of professional files and 1 box of things she'd saved from the office. She had a mind that still worked even when the rest of her was failing. She just needed 1 break. 1. Excuse me. Sorry. Are you? She looked up. He was standing about 6 feet away, near the next table, with the slightly sheepish expression of a man who had started a sentence without fully committing to where it was going. Mid-30s, maybe. She'd have guessed 36, 37, though she'd always been slightly bad at that. Brown hair that needed cutting, a gray t-shirt with a small, unidentifiable stain near the left pocket that he clearly hadn't noticed. He was holding 2 paper cups of coffee, one in each hand, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize, which was unusual because she'd become quite good at categorizing how people looked at her. Not pity, not the reflexive overbrightness of someone about to be performatively kind. Something more uncertain than that. Like he'd been working up to this and was now slightly unsure it had been a good idea. I wasn't trying to stare, he said, and stopped and shifted his weight. I'm going to start over. Hi, I'm Ethan. She looked at him for a second. Sophia. Happy birthday. She blinked. How did you say? You were looking at the birthday cake. He nodded toward the display case. For a while. And he seemed to think about this. Look, I'm probably completely off base, but you had the kind of look on your face that I recognize. And I was about to order a second coffee I don't need. So, he held out one of the cups. If you want it. She looked at the cup, then at him. You don't know me, she said. No. You just decided to buy a stranger coffee. I decided to buy myself a coffee and then got 2 by mistake, he said, and there was something almost careful in the way he said it, like he was constructing the fiction slightly in real time for her benefit, and they both knew it. Against everything, against the general calculus of the morning, she almost smiled. I don't need charity, she said. It's coffee. He set it down on the table near her gently, like he was placing something down instead of handing it over, giving her the out of just ignoring it. You don't have to take it. He started to turn back toward his own table. Ethan? He stopped. She looked at the cup. Thank you. He nodded, and then after a second he said, Mind if I sit? Or, You can sit. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down with the awkward, slight overproduction of someone who'd been uncertain whether they'd been invited. He was quiet for a moment, wrapping both hands around his own cup, and she noticed they were slightly rough, not office hands, working hands, though she wasn't sure working at what. You live nearby? He asked. About 4 blocks. She took a careful sip of the coffee. It was black, which was how she drank it, and she wondered briefly if he'd guessed or gotten lucky. You? Same direction. I come here most mornings when I've got time, he paused. Which isn't that often, to be honest. What do you do? I'm in construction, site management. He said it straightforwardly, without the slight defensive note some men added when they thought you might judge the answer. She appreciated that. You? The honest answer was, I used to run a digital consulting company, and now I live on an air mattress, and I came in here today to look at cake I can't buy because it's my birthday, and I didn't know what else to do. She said, I'm between things. He nodded like that was a complete answer, which also she appreciated. How long? He asked. About a year? She paused. It's been a complicated year. Yeah, he said, and there was something in the single syllable, not sympathy exactly, more like recognition, that made her glance at him more carefully. I know complicated years. She waited. He looked down at his cup. My daughter's mom left about 18 months ago. It wasn't a disaster, like nobody was awful to anyone. It just fell apart. But, he shrugged, a gesture that contained a lot. Suddenly I'm doing this thing I thought was a 2-person job with 1 person, you know? And the job is a kid, so there's not really a way to do it halfway. How old? 7. Her name's Lily. And his face changed when he said the name, softened in the specific way faces do when people talk about the thing that's keeping them going. He laughed quietly. She's a lot, in the best way. Is she with you now? She's at school. I drop her off at 8, and then I've got about 40 minutes before I have to be on site. He glanced at the door. She'd probably want to know it was someone's birthday. She's very into birthdays. Tell her a stranger said happy birthday back. He smiled at that, and it was a real smile. Not the forced brightness of polite conversation, but the kind that arrived slightly ahead of the person's awareness of it. Sophia looked at the display case again. The white fondant cake with the gold candle. $38. You should get it, he said. She looked back at him. I was very obvious about that, wasn't I? Little bit. I can't. She said it simply, without embarrassment, because she was past the phase of being embarrassed about things she couldn't control. I'm having a financially creative birthday. He looked at her, then at the display case, then back at her. He reached into his back pocket and put two 20s on the table. She stared at them. No. It's your birthday. Ethan, I don't... She stopped. I don't take money from people. I know. That's why I put it on the table instead of handing it to you. He said it without any performance, just matter of fact. I'm not asking you to take anything from me. I'm just saying there's $40 on this table and a birthday cake over there, and you're a grown adult who can do whatever you want with that information. She looked at the bills for a long moment. She thought about the air mattress, about the dollar in her lap, about how long it had been since anyone had done anything for her without wanting something in return, and how suspicious that made her even when, especially when, the thing being offered seemed genuinely small. Why? She said. Why what? Why would you do this for someone you don't know? He thought about it, genuinely thought about it, not the way people do when they're performing consideration, but the way people do when they're actually working toward an honest answer. I had a morning about 8 months ago, he said slowly, when I was pretty sure I was going to lose the house. Lily's house, the one she'd lived in her whole life. I was sitting in my car outside work, and I hadn't told anyone because I didn't know how, and the woman who ran the coffee cart outside my job site. I'd never talked to her beyond medium black, no sugar. She looked at me and she said, "Rough morning?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Here." And she gave me a coffee and a muffin, and she charged me for only the coffee. He paused. I don't know why she did it. I didn't ask. But I went in that day and I worked and I figured the thing out. I kept the house. He looked at the money on the table. $10 worth of muffin, maybe. I don't know. Something about it just... He stopped. Kept you going, Sophia finished. Something like that. She looked at the 20s. She looked at the cake in the case. She thought about pride, all the ways she'd worn it like armor, and all the ways it had still gotten bent out of shape anyway. Then she picked up the bills. On. Kelly at the counter was young enough that she was still in the phase of her career where she found emotional scenes in public more interesting than uncomfortable, and she assembled the birthday cake box with a kind of gentle attention that Sophia would have found patronizing if she hadn't been so tired. Do you want me to add anything? Kelly asked. We have birthday candles, the regular kind, or the sparkly ones. Regular, Sophia said. And a name on it? Sophia paused. She thought about it. Just the candle is fine. Kelly slid the box across the counter. Sophia took it in her lap. She wheeled back to the table. Ethan was still there, which she'd half expected him not to be. He'd been checking his phone, but he put it down when she came back, and she set the box on the table between them. Would you... She stopped. I don't have anyone to eat this with. I know you have to be somewhere, but if you've got 10 minutes. He looked at the box, then at her. Then he leaned back in his chair in the easy way of someone who has just decided something. I've got 10 minutes, he said. Kelly came over without being asked and brought a small plate and a fork and 2 paper napkins, and she lit the candle with the lighter she produced from her apron pocket, and then she walked back to the counter with the careful non-presence of someone who understood the scene required a certain amount of privacy. The flame was small and very still. Sophia looked at it for a moment. She wasn't going to cry. She'd decided that. But the inside of her chest did something complicated and involuntary, some kind of collapse and resettlement, the way a house sounds in winter when the temperature changes suddenly and the whole structure adjusts. Do you make wishes? Ethan asked. No, she said. Then, maybe. Take your time. She looked at the flame. She thought about what she wanted. Not the big things. Not the company and the reputation and the legs that worked the way they used to. Those were too large to hold in a birthday wish, too heavy. She thought about something smaller, something she could actually believe in at 10:04 in the morning in a bakery on a Tuesday. She thought, I want one day where I feel like I'm going to be okay. She blew out the candle. The cake was good. Not extraordinary, but good. The kind of buttercream that tasted like it had been made that morning by someone who cared about buttercream. Ethan ate one slice and she ate one slice, and he checked his phone twice and she asked him about Lily, what she was like in school, what she was into. And he talked about his daughter the way she'd heard a handful of people talk about things they'd decided were worth everything, without the usual cultural embarrassment about sincerity, without qualifying it. Lily, apparently, was obsessed with dinosaurs and deeply skeptical of most vegetables. She had her father's eyes and what Ethan described as her own completely original personality that I can't take any credit for. She had decided at age 6 that she wanted to be a scientist who also sometimes paints, and Ethan had responded to this by buying both a microscope and a set of watercolors, which Sophia thought was the correct answer. "She sounds great," Sophia said, and meant it. "She is." He said it simply. "She's the part of my life that's definitely working." "How's the rest of it?" "Oh, you know." He looked out the window. "It's a lot of figuring out as you go. I had this idea of what things were supposed to look like, and then they didn't look like that, and now I'm kind of building a different picture without a very good reference photo." He glanced at her. "You know that feeling?" "I know it extremely well." He stood up. It was time, she could tell. And he gathered his cup, and she expected him to say the usual things, the nice to meet you, and take care that were the polite exits from unexpected moments like this one. And they would go their separate ways, and maybe she'd see him here again sometime, and maybe she wouldn't, and that would be the shape of it. Instead, he said, "Can I ask what happened? The year, I mean, the complicated year." She looked at him. She considered how much to say, or whether to say anything, because she'd become careful with the story. Not because she was ashamed of it, but because she'd told it to the wrong people enough times to know that most people, when given the full version, either pity you or update their opinion of you downward in ways they couldn't quite hide. But there was something about this man, his rough hands and his gray t-shirt, and the slight stain near the pocket, and the way he'd put money on a table instead of handing it to her because he'd understood somehow the difference. That made her decide the full version was okay. She told him. Not everything, but the shape of it. The company, the investor, the collapse, the accident. She watched his face while she talked, and his face did not do the things she'd learned to dread. He didn't look at her chair with the particular species of calculation people sometimes performed, adding it to the rest of the story and coming up with a sum that equaled too much. He just listened. He had the rare quality of a person who listens with their whole face. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "That's a lot," he said. "Yeah. The investor. Marcus." He said the name with a flatness that indicated what he thought without performing it. "He's still operating?" "As far as I know." He stopped himself from finishing whatever that was going to be. "I'm sorry, for what it's worth." "It's worth something," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. He looked at her for another moment, and she got the sense that he was deciding something. Some small internal question that she wasn't privy to the full context of. "I'm going to be here Thursday morning," he said. "Same time, if you want coffee." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because you seem like someone who could use a coffee on Thursday." He said it lightly, but it landed with a weight that was slightly different from lightness. "And I could use the company, and I figure you're either going to say yes or no." She thought about it. She thought about the air mattress, and the laptop, and the 3 boxes in the storage unit, and the 4 blocks between here and the apartment, and all the mornings between today and some future version of her life that she could not quite see yet, but was fairly certain existed. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday." He picked up his cup. "Happy birthday, Sophia. Tell Lily thanks for the enthusiasm she doesn't know she expressed." He laughed, a real one, and walked toward the door, and the bell above it chimed when he left, and she sat there in the warm morning light of the bakery with half a birthday cake in front of her and an empty coffee cup and the stub of a small white candle still in the cake, and she put both hands flat on the table again and looked at them. Her hands still worked. Outside, the city was going about its business, the strollers and the bikes and the woman in the yellow coat who was coming back now from the other direction, the little white dog trotting beside her with the unreasonable happiness of small animals, and the sun was still doing what it had been doing since she'd sat down, falling through the enormous window in warm honey-colored pieces, landing on the wooden tables and the sugar roses in the display case and the small battered birthday cake on the table in front of her. She had $1 in her wallet. She had a laptop in her apartment. She had a storage unit with 3 boxes of professional files and a mind that worked even when she was too tired to trust it. And she had apparently a coffee on Thursday. It wasn't much. But Sophia Bennett had built things from less, and she knew it. And somewhere underneath the exhaustion and the weight of the last 18 months and the complicated machinery of a birthday morning that had not gone the way she'd planned, she could feel the thing that had kept her building in the first place. That quiet, stubborn, slightly unreasonable certainty that she was not finished. She reached over and straightened the candle stub in the cake. She was not finished. Thursday came with this kind of gray sky that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain or just threaten it, the clouds sitting low over the city in that particular autumn way that made everything feel slightly compressed, like the world had a ceiling suddenly. Sophia was up at 6:30. She'd barely slept past 6 in months, her body having apparently decided that rest was something other people did. And she spent 40 minutes at her laptop before she let herself think about the bakery. She was rebuilding her client list. That was the project, the unglamorous, grinding, deeply humbling project of reaching out to people she'd worked with before the collapse and asking, in various carefully worded ways, whether they might have work for her as a freelance consultant. Most didn't respond. A few responded kindly and said not right now. 2 had responded with the specific variety of distant politeness that meant they'd heard something about her and weren't sure which version to believe. 1, a woman named Carol Tran, who ran a mid-size e-commerce business in the suburbs and whom Sophia had helped restructure her supply chain management 2 years ago, had written back on Wednesday evening with, "Sophia, glad you're back in the game. I've actually been dealing with something on the logistics side that's been driving me crazy. Can we get on a call next week?" Sophia had read that email 4 times. She'd written back quickly before she could overthink it, and then she'd closed the laptop and sat in the dark of the apartment for a moment, her hands on her knees, doing the breathing exercise the physical therapist had taught her that she'd thought was stupid at first, and now did approximately twice a day. 1 call. 1 possible client. It was the size of a doorway, but it was a doorway. She arrived at Sweetencombe at 9:50, 2 minutes later than she'd aimed for because the sidewalk on the north side of 4th had a crack in it that had heaved upward over the summer and the city hadn't fixed it yet, and her left wheel caught it wrong and she'd had to back up and reroute, which added 3 minutes and a specific flavor of low-grade irritation she'd learned to just absorb and move through without letting it attach to the rest of the day. Ethan was already there. He was sitting at the same table by the window, 2 cups in front of him, and he looked up when the bell chimed. "You walked the 4th Street route," he said. She stopped. "How do you know that?" "You're 2 minutes late and you've got that look." He pushed one of the cups toward her side of the table. "The crack by the fire hydrant?" She pulled herself up to the table. "The city has had 6 months to fix that." "I know, I've almost reported it about 4 times. He said it with the slight guilt of someone who knows they haven't followed through on a reasonable intention. "I'll actually do it this week." "You won't." "Probably not," he admitted. She took the coffee and it was black again, and this time she asked, "How did you know I drink it black?" He looked mildly surprised by the question. "I just guessed. You didn't seem like a lot of stuff in it person." "What does that mean?" "I don't know. You're efficient. You don't seem like you want to complicate the coffee." She considered this characterization of herself. It wasn't wrong. "How's your week been?" he asked. "Better than last week." She paused. "Possibly. I have a call next week with a former client. It's not confirmed yet, but it might be something." "That's good." "It's a maybe." A maybe is better than a no. He said it simply, not as the kind of hollow encouragement people offered when they didn't know what else to say, but with the tone of someone who'd been tracking maybes carefully for the last year and a half and had learned to be honest about what they were worth. "What kind of work?" She explained, logistics consulting, supply chain, the gap between what small and mid-sized businesses could afford in terms of operational infrastructure and what they actually needed. the space she'd carved out before everything had fallen apart. She explained it the way she would to a potential client, clear and specific, without the self-deprecation she'd noticed herself performing lately in conversations where she felt the need to get ahead of judgment. He listened. He didn't pretend to understand the specifics more than he did, but he asked 2 questions that were actually good questions, the kind that indicated he was tracking the logic, not just waiting for her to finish. So it's basically, "You're the person who figures out where the leak is," he said finally. She thought about it. "Yeah, more or less. I get that. That's half of what I do on site." He leaned back. "You walk in somewhere and the whole thing looks fine until you look at the joints. And everybody's been looking at the walls for so long they stopped seeing the joints." She looked at him. "That's actually a pretty good description. Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not surprised." She was, a little. They talked for 40 minutes. She'd budgeted for 20, which she told him, and he'd said he had to be on site by 10:30, and they'd both ignored their own timelines in the way people do when a conversation has moved into the part where it's actually going somewhere. He told her about the current job, a commercial renovation on the east side, a building that had good bones, but a previous owner who'd made some creative and legally questionable decisions about load-bearing walls. She told him about the storage unit with the 3 boxes of files, the paper architecture of her old company that she'd been slowly going through on evenings when she had the energy, reconstructing what she'd built so she could understand what she still had. "Why'd you keep all of it?" he asked. "Because I built it," she said, like the answer was obvious. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't exist." He was quiet for a second. "Some people would have just wanted to be done with it." "I know, but I need to know what worked and what didn't work and what I let happen that I shouldn't have." She turned the cup in her hands. "I went over the Marcus Hale partnership agreement 3 times last month. I found 6 places where I should have asked different questions." "That sounds like punishing yourself." "No," she said it firmly. "Punishment would be not looking at it. Looking at it is just information. I need the information." He looked at her for a moment, and she got the sense again of that particular quality of attention he had, the kind that was unnerving in a not unpleasant way, like being read slightly more accurately than you'd expected. "You're not very gentle with yourself," he said. "I'm realistic with myself." Sometimes those are different things. She didn't have a good answer for that, so she didn't give one. Outside the window, the gray sky had made its decision, and a light rain was starting. The thin, directionless kind that couldn't even commit to being real rain, just enough to make the sidewalk darker and the light softer. A couple walking past both reached up simultaneously for the same umbrella in a way that suggested they'd done it 10,000 times, the choreography of long cohabitation, and Sophia watched them pass without quite knowing what she felt about it. "Thursday regular thing?" Ethan asked, picking up his cup. "Maybe," she said. "There's that word again." "Thursday regular thing," she said. He smiled at that, stood up, pulled on the jacket that had been draped over his chair, and she noticed it had a company logo on the left chest pocket, Walker & Sons Site Management, which told her something about either his family history or his ambitions, possibly both. "Your company?" she asked, nodding at the logo. He glanced down. "Mine and my dad's. Or it was. He retired 3 years ago." He said it with a slight shift in his expression that she filed away. Something there, some weight around the retirement, but he didn't open it and she didn't press. "Just mine now, technically. I kept the name." "Why?" He looked at the logo for a second. "Because he built it," he said, which landed in the space between them with a resonance that was probably not accidental. She nodded. He said goodbye and left, and she sat by the window for another 10 minutes, watching the thin rain, drinking the last of her coffee, and thinking about joints, about where the leaks were, about the difference between looking at the walls and looking at the places where things connected. She had work to do. The call with Carol Tran happened the following Tuesday, and it went for an hour and 20 minutes. Sophia had blocked 45, a habit from her previous life that she'd maintained even without a calendar full of back-to-back meetings. Carol's logistics problem was real and specific, and the kind of thing Sophia had solved before, more or less, in different shapes. They talked through it. Carol asked good questions. Sophia answered them directly and didn't perform confidence she didn't have, but she also didn't undersell what she knew, which was the balance she'd been trying to recalibrate. At the end of the call, Carol said, "Okay, I want to send you a formal scope. Are you set up to invoice? Do you have a thing?" "I have a thing," Sophia said. She did not entirely have a thing. She had a freelance invoice template she'd downloaded from a business website at 2 in the morning 2 weeks ago and customized with her name and a PayPal account she'd opened during her company years and never closed. It would work. It would have to work. "Great," Carol said. "Give me a week." And Sophia, a brief pause. "I heard things went sideways for a while. I'm glad you're back." After the call ended, Sophia sat at her desk, which was a second-hand folding table she'd picked up from a neighbor moving out, positioned near the window where the afternoon light was best, and she put both palms flat on its surface and looked at her laptop screen. The invoice template was still open in another tab. Her notebook with the handwritten notes from the call was beside her, 2 pages of shorthand she'd need to expand into a proper proposal. She was shaking slightly. Not from nerves. It was past nerves. It was the physiological response to high-stakes sustained focus unwinding. She recognized it. She let it pass. This was how it started. This was exactly how it had started the first time. One client, one problem, one call that went well, one proposal, one invoice. The architecture of something real, built one piece at a time. She opened her notebook to a blank page and wrote, "Bennett Consulting, restart." Then she wrote, "Client 1, Carol Tran/Tran e-commerce." She looked at it for a moment. Then she pulled the laptop closer and started writing the proposal. She told Ethan about it on Thursday, and his face did the thing it did when Lily had been mentioned. That particular quality of undisguised pleasure that some people could pull off without it looking performed. "First one's the hardest," he said. "I haven't closed it yet. But the call went well." "The call went well." "Then you'll close it." He said it like a fact, not a reassurance, which was the version of it she could actually use. She'd been coming to the bakery Thursdays for 3 weeks now, and the routine had established itself in the way routines do when they're filling a real gap. Not because either of them had decided to make it a tradition, but because it had simply continued, and neither of them had stopped it. Kelly at the counter had stopped asking how they took their coffees. The older man who read the newspaper had become a fixture of their peripheral mornings, and they'd started referring to him between themselves as Harold, though neither of them actually knew his name. "Harold looks like he got bad news today," Ethan said, glancing past her. She turned briefly. The newspaper man was staring at his paper with more intensity than usual, which could mean bad news or just an interesting sports section. "Or it's the crossword. He does the crossword with a pen, so he's either very confident or very committed to his mistakes." "Both, probably," Sophia said. They'd developed this, the small lateral conversations that lived around the edges of the real ones, the easy orbit of people who'd started to know each other without quite naming what that knowing was. She was careful with it. She'd been careful in general with the whole thing. With whatever this Thursday morning arrangement was, with whatever Ethan Walker was in the current geography of her life, which she'd classified internally as person who helps without making it heavy and left it there for the time being. She had enough complications. She did not need to create new ones, but she liked the Thursdays. She was willing to admit that. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "The company name, Walker and Sons. Your dad retired. How was that? When it became just yours?" He was quiet for a moment, turning his cup. "Complicated," he said finally. "You don't have to—" "No, it's— I don't mind." He looked out the window. "My dad built that company from when I was 8 years old. I basically grew up on job sites. He used to take me along on weekends, and I'd hand him tools I didn't know the names of yet, and I thought it was the best thing in the world." A pause. "When he said he wanted to retire, I was happy for him. He'd worked hard, he deserved it. But the day he signed the papers over to me and I drove home, I sat in my car for probably 20 minutes. Why? Because suddenly it was just mine to break." He said it flatly. "All those years it was his thing that I was part of. Then it was my thing. And there's a difference. When it was his thing, whatever went wrong was— I was responsible, but it wasn't the same. Once it's yours, every bad decision has your name on it." She held his gaze. I know exactly what you mean. I know you do. He said it quietly. That's why I said it. She thought about Bennett Digital Solutions, about the day she'd signed the incorporation papers at a desk in a rented office that had been empty the week before, surrounded by flat-pack furniture she'd assembled herself. The Allen wrench still in her jacket pocket when the notary came. How she'd driven home and called her mother, who she talked to once a week, and who had never fully understood what Sophia did for work, but had always understood when it mattered. And her mother had said, "I'm proud of you, baby." In the straightforward way she said everything, without decoration, and Sophia had said thanks, "Mom," and then hung up and sat on her kitchen floor and breathed, hers to break. "Did you ever regret keeping the name?" she asked. "Some days," he said. "When something goes wrong on site and a client's angry, I think, it would have been easier to start fresh, different name, no wait. But then I drive home and Lily's waiting, and I think about my dad watching TV at his house in Arizona, and..." He shrugged. "The wait is also the point, you know? The point is that it means something." She nodded. They sat with that for a moment in the easy way they'd developed for sitting with things that didn't require responses. Outside, two pigeons were having an argument on the windowsill over something small and invisible. The way pigeons always seemed to be operating on a scale of priorities no human could fully access. "How's Lily?" Sophia asked. "She's good. She got in trouble on Tuesday for telling her science teacher that his plant was dying because he was overwatering it." Sophia almost choked on her coffee. "Was she right?" 100% right. "Was the teacher mad?" "No. He was more embarrassed, I think. He moved the plant to a less sunny spot and sent a note home saying Lily shows strong observational skills but needs to work on delivery. The delivery was probably fine. The delivery was apparently very direct. He was clearly trying not to look too proud of this. She told him she'd been researching plant care because she wants to grow tomatoes. Does she? Apparently. She asked me last week if we can convert part of the backyard." He paused. "I said yes because I'm physically unable to say no to that kid about anything plant-related." "You're going to be in trouble when she's 16. "I'm fully aware." He said it with the tone of a man who had looked at this future and decided the love was worth the problem. "She wants to come here on Saturday, actually, to the bakery. She heard me mention it, and now she wants to see the cakes." Sophia felt something move in her chest, a small involuntary shift. She wants to see the cakes, or she wants to investigate where her dad goes Thursday mornings? He paused. The expression that crossed his face was, caught was the word for it, just slightly. "Possibly both," he said. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back at her steadily, without flinching from it, which she appreciated and also found slightly unnerving. There was something in the steadiness that was asking a question without actually asking it, which was either very perceptive or very convenient, depending on how you wanted to look at it. She looked at her cup. "I'd like to meet her," she said, "if that's what you were circling around." "I wasn't circling." "You were a little bit circling." "Maybe a little bit?" He smiled, the real one, the slightly ahead of itself one. "Saturday, 10 o'clock. She'll probably ask you your opinion on tomato varieties within the first 5 minutes. I know nothing about tomatoes. She'll appreciate the opportunity to educate you." Sit. Saturday at 10, Sophia wore the same navy dress she'd been wearing the morning they'd met. She'd washed it twice since then, and it had held up, which was something to be said for it, and added the light cardigan she'd bought secondhand the previous winter, cream-colored with small buttons down the front, because it had gotten colder. She arrived at the bakery 4 minutes early and was slightly annoyed with herself for it. They were already there. Lily was, there was no other word for it, present in the way children were when they were completely themselves, which some children managed and others had already started learning not to do. She was sitting in the chair her father usually sat in, turned sideways so she could look at the display case, her feet not quite reaching the floor, her dark hair in 2 uneven braids that suggested Ethan had done them and done his best. She was wearing a green jacket with a small embroidered dinosaur on the lapel that Sophia decided immediately was the best piece of clothing she'd seen all year. Ethan stood when Sophia wheeled in, which she found both slightly old-fashioned and unexpectedly nice. "Hey," he said. "Hey." Lily turned around. She looked at Sophia with the direct, unfiltered assessment of a child who hadn't yet learned to be subtle about being curious. And Sophia looked back at her with an equal directness that seemed to register. "Hi," Lily said. "Hi. I'm Sophia. I like your dinosaur." Lily looked down at her lapel like she'd forgotten it was there, then back up. "It's a Parasaurolophus. Dad got it wrong on the tag, so he called it a duck-billed dinosaur, but that's not specific enough." "Is it not?" "There are multiple duck-billed dinosaurs. A Parasaurolophus is a specific kind. It's a hadrosaur. They had these head crests that they used to make sounds." She demonstrated briefly, apparently from memory, an impression of what she imagined the sound had been, which was both earnest and entirely unself-conscious. Sophia said, "I did not know that." Lily nodded like this was the expected and acceptable answer. They ordered coffee for the adults, hot chocolate, and a cupcake with an architectural quantity of frosting for Lily, who examined the cupcake with the attention of a structural engineer before deciding where to begin eating it. The conversation moved in the slightly odd three-way geometry of an adult-adult-child arrangement, where the child is simultaneously the center of gravity and the most honest voice in the room. Lily asked Sophia what she did for work, and Sophia explained it at about 70% of the complexity she'd use for an adult, and Lily listened seriously and then said, "So you fix things that are broken, but not like physically?" "Yes, basically. Like a doctor, but for companies." "That's actually a very good way to put it." Lily seemed pleased but not surprised by this assessment of her own accuracy. She took another precise bite of cupcake. "Dad says you're rebuilding." Ethan said, "Lily, what?" "You said it." Sophia looked at Ethan briefly. He had the look of a man experiencing a mild, predictable consequence, and then back at Lily. "He's right. I'm rebuilding." "Is it hard?" "Very. Dad says the hard things are the ones worth doing. He says it about homework too, but I think he means it about other things more." Sophia looked at Ethan again, and this time he met her eyes, and something moved between them. The look of two people who have been seen by a 7-year-old and are not sure whether to be embarrassed about it. "Your dad's pretty smart," Sophia said. "He's okay," Lily said, with the magnificent indifference of a child who loves someone completely and doesn't feel the need to say so in plain terms because it's simply the ground she stands on. Ethan looked at his coffee. His ear had gone slightly pink. They stayed for an hour and 10 minutes. Lily finished the cupcake and then interrogated the display case with Kelly, who was charmed into explaining what each cake was made of in full technical detail. Ethan and Sophia talked about the proposal she'd sent Carol, about the job site, about small things, the texture of ordinary life. And the rain that had been threatening all week finally arrived properly, drumming against the bakery window in sheets, and none of them moved to leave because the inside of the bakery was warm, and the coffee was still there, and the rain was doing what it was supposed to do. At some point, Lily climbed back into her chair and leaned against her father's arm without comment, watching the rain with the settled look of a child who has reached maximum happiness for the moment and is simply occupying it. Ethan put his arm around her without stopping the conversation, the unconscious fluency of a parent, and Sophia watched the two of them against the rain-striped window and felt something she didn't immediately name. It wasn't longing, exactly. It wasn't envy. It was something softer and more complicated, the recognition of a kind of warmth that she'd put aside, somewhere along the years of building and planning and defending, and that she could still feel the outline of when it was close enough to touch. She wasn't going to say that. She filed it away instead, like the other things she filed away. The information about Ethan, the things he'd told her, the quality of his attention, the way the whole situation had a shape she hadn't expected. Carol Tran sent the formal scope on the same day, late afternoon, after Sophia had gotten home from the bakery and hung her cardigan on the hook by the door. She opened the email sitting at the folding table in the thin afternoon light, the rain still coming down outside, and read through the scope document twice. It was real. It was specific. It had a budget line with a number on it. She wrote back, "Reviewing now. We'll have questions by Monday. Professional, measured, the language of someone operating inside a system rather than scratching at the outside of it." She closed the laptop. She sat in the quiet of the apartment, listening to the rain, and thought about Lily's voice. Are you rebuilding? And about the invoice template still open in another tab, and about the light through the bakery window, and the 3 boxes in the storage unit, and all the things she still had that she hadn't finished using. She reached for her notebook. She opened it to the page where she'd written Bennett Consulting. Restart. Below. Client 1. Carol Tran. She wrote, Proposal delivered, scope received. Deadline, Monday questions. She looked at the page. Then she added, in the margin, in smaller writing, the kind you put somewhere you're not entirely sure you want to be seen. It's starting again. She capped the pen. It was starting again. The Carol Tran project started on a Monday and immediately revealed itself to be more complicated than the scope had suggested, which was not surprising. It never wasn't. The supply chain problem Carol had described on the phone turned out to have a secondary problem nested inside it, the way structural issues often did. And Sophia spent the first week just mapping it, sitting at the folding table with 2 monitors. She'd bought a second-hand one from a guy on Craigslist for $30, and building the kind of operational diagram she used to put on a whiteboard in the old office, except now it was a Google Doc that only she could see. It was fine. The work was good. The work had always been the thing that made sense to her when other things didn't, and she fell back into it with the specific relief of someone returning to a language they thought they'd forgotten and finding it still in their mouth. Carol sent 3 emails the first week, each one slightly more anxious than the last, which Sophia recognized as the behavior of a client who needed visible progress to stay calm. She started sending brief daily update notes. 3 sentences, no jargon, here's what I looked at today, here's what I found, here's what I'm doing tomorrow. And the emails from Carol slowed to one every 2 days, which was the rhythm of someone who'd started to trust the process. On Thursday, she went to the bakery and told Ethan about the nested problem, and he said, So it's the wall and the floor? And she said, Exactly. And they talked about it for 20 minutes before she realized she'd been using her hands while she explained it. That specific vocabulary of gesture she'd developed from years of standing at whiteboards in front of rooms full of people. And she stopped, slightly self-conscious. Don't stop, he said. You do that when you know what you're talking about. Do what? He demonstrated, briefly, a rough approximation of her gesture, the forward-reaching one she used when she was drawing invisible diagrams in the air. It was recognizable enough to be embarrassing. I talk with my hands, she said. A lot of people do. I didn't used to. I trained myself out of it when I was doing investor presentations because I thought it looked unprofessional. He looked at her like this was a slightly sad thing to have done. Seems like extra work. A lot of things I did in those years were extra work. She hadn't meant it as anything beyond what it was, an observation about her own professional history, but it landed with a weight that surprised her slightly, the way true things did when you said them out loud for the first time. She picked up her coffee. He didn't push it, which she'd noticed was a consistent quality of his. He would register things and let them settle rather than pulling at them, which was either emotional intelligence or personal history or some combination. She suspected the latter. My dad called, he said after a moment. Yeah? He heard something's going on with a building permit I'm trying to get through on the East Side project. Someone tipped him off. He turned his cup in a slow circle. He doesn't call much, but when he calls, it's usually because he's worried about something and won't say he's worried, so instead he calls to ask about the permit. What did you tell him? That I'm handling it. Are you? Mostly. He paused. There's a city inspector who's been slow-walking the approval, and I can't figure out if it's incompetence or something else. It's been 3 weeks. The client's starting to ask questions I don't have good answers to yet. What kind of questions? The are we on schedule kind, which we're not technically because of the permit. But the permit isn't my fault and the client knows that, but there's still, that window where everyone's pretending it's fine and you're all waiting to see if it actually becomes fine before someone stops pretending. Sophia nodded. She knew that window. It was a specific kind of professional limbo where the outcome was still genuinely uncertain, and the management of perception was almost as important as the management of the problem, and she'd spent years operating in it. Document everything, she said. Every email, every call, every time you contact that inspector's office. Dates and times. He looked at her. Why? Because if it becomes something other than incompetence, you want the paper trail to already exist. She said it without drama, just practically. And even if it doesn't, when the client eventually asks for a formal explanation of the delay, you want to be able to show them the timeline without having to reconstruct it from memory. He was quiet for a second, processing this. You think it's something other than incompetence? I don't know, probably not. But 3 weeks is long. Yeah. He pulled out his phone and made a note. I'll start today. She watched him do it. The quick, unself-conscious note to himself. And thought about how much of competence was just exactly that. Not brilliance, not vision, just writing things down when someone told you to, starting today, before you forgot. She thought about the 6 places in the Marcus Hale contract where she'd asked the wrong questions. She didn't say any of that. She just drank her coffee. The permit resolved itself 2 weeks later. Incompetence, as it turned out, or at least that was the version Ethan reported with the particular flatness of someone who had decided to accept the official explanation without pressing further, which Sophia read as a small professional calculation she respected. The East Side project got back on schedule. The client stopped asking questions. The window of pretending everything was fine collapsed neatly into everything actually being fine, which was the best outcome and also, in her experience, the least dramatically satisfying. By the 4th week of the Carol Tran project, Sophia had rebuilt enough of a picture of the supply chain dysfunction that she'd identified the specific vendor relationship at the center of it, a fulfillment partner Carol had been with for 6 years and trusted probably past the point where the data still supported that trust. She put together a 12-page analysis. She was careful with it, careful in the way she'd learned to be when delivering conclusions that would require a client to admit they'd been wrong about something they'd felt certain about for years. She built the case from the numbers forward rather than the conclusion backward. She wrote it so that Carol could arrive at the conclusion herself and feel like she'd seen it, not like it had been handed to her. Carol called an hour after Sophia sent it. "Oh no," Carol said, which was not what Sophia had expected as an opening. "I know. I've been with Premier Fulfillment since I started the business. I know. The relationship is real. The problem is also real." A silence. Sophia waited. "Can it be fixed without ending the relationship?" Carol asked. "Possibly. I'd want to put together a renegotiation framework. There are 3 specific terms in your current contract that are working against you. If we restructure those, the economics change." She paused. "But I'm going to be honest with you. The pattern in their fulfillment reporting for the last 8 months suggests they're managing capacity constraints they haven't told you about. That's not a contract problem, that's a trust problem, and that's a harder fix." Another silence. Sophia could hear Carol breathing, the specific rhythm of someone absorbing something they didn't want to absorb. "What would you do?" Carol asked. "If it were yours?" The question hit her somewhere complicated, but she kept her voice level. "I'd renegotiate the terms and set a 90-day performance window with specific benchmarks. I'd also start quietly scoping alternatives, not to leave, but to have options. Because the worst negotiating position you can be in is one where the other party knows you have no leverage." That's exactly what Marcus used to say." Carol stopped. "Sorry, I had a business partner once who—" "I know," Sophia said. "It's fine." Pause. "Right. I forgot you know who he is." "I do." Carol was quiet for a moment in a different way, a more careful, considered way. "I heard about what happened with you. Not from him. From someone who knew you before. I should have said something earlier." "You didn't need to." "I should have." Another beat. "He did the same kind of thing to a company in Columbus, you know, different structure, different timeline, but the same general shape." Sophia was very still. "I didn't know that." "It's not—" Carol hesitated. "It's not public." It was settled. "But I heard through someone in the industry who wanted to make sure people knew." After the call ended, Sophia sat at the folding table without moving for a few minutes. The afternoon light was doing its usual thing through the window, falling across the desk in a long rectangle that moved slowly as the sun shifted. She looked at it. She thought about what Carol had said. Same general shape. And what it meant that she wasn't the only one. And how that was both something and nothing. Simultaneously, because knowing you weren't the only person someone had hurt didn't actually change what had happened to you. It just changed the shape of the thing in the world. She thought about what she'd told Ethan. Looking at it is just information. I need the information. She wrote in her notebook, Carol, Columbus Connection, re-MH, follow up. Not because she knew what she'd do with it, but because she was done not writing things down. November arrived without ceremony, the way November did in the Midwest. One day the leaves were still mostly there, and the next day they were mostly gone, and the sky had moved into its winter phase, that particular flat gray that sat over the city from November to March like a held breath. Sophia had added a second freelance client, a small manufacturer in the western suburbs who needed help mapping a production bottleneck, and she was billing enough to cover the rent with a margin she was carefully not spending, rebuilding the buffer she'd once had and lost and needed again. The air mattress had been replaced by a real bed, a full-size frame from a furniture liquidation place on the south side, assembled on a Saturday afternoon with a YouTube tutorial playing on her phone propped against the wall. It had taken an hour and 40 minutes. The Allen wrench had been the wrong size, and she'd had to go to the hardware store and come back, which she'd been irrationally annoyed about. But the bed was level and solid, and when she lay in it that night, she realized she'd slept on the air mattress for 7 months and hadn't let herself notice how bad it was until the comparison was right there under her. She told Ethan about the bed on Thursday, and he said, "That's a real thing," with the tone he used for things that mattered more than the words. "It sounds ridiculous," she said. "It doesn't. I remember when Lily got her first real room after we moved. We'd been in the apartment for a year and a half after the split, and we finally moved into the house, and she had this room that was actually hers." She went in and closed the door. He paused. I stood outside in the hall for a second thinking, okay, this is better. This is how it's supposed to be. He looked at his cup. Doesn't matter that it's a bed or a room. The thing it means is the same. She'd started to look at him differently over the past few weeks, in the way you looked at someone when you'd accumulated enough information about them that the picture had filled in past the initial sketch. She saw more clearly now the places where he was tired, the faint tension around his eyes on the mornings when the job had been particularly hard, or when Lily had had a difficult night, or when the compounded logistics of being a single parent and a small business owner had worn something down. He never named it directly. He had the stoicism of a man raised in a culture of managing things, working through things, not making it someone else's problem. She found it occasionally maddening. "You're allowed to say when things are hard," she said one Thursday, after he'd given her a 3-sentence summary of a week that had clearly been harder than 3 sentences. He looked at her. "Things are hard sometimes. That's not what I meant." I know what you meant." He said it without defensiveness. "I'm better with the practical version. Like, the permit was hard, I managed it. Here's how. That's the version I know how to give. And the other version?" A pause. "The other version is that sometimes I drive home from a site and I sit in the car in front of the house for a few minutes because going inside means being fully on. Dad mode, dinner, homework, bedtime, and I love all of it, but some days I need 5 minutes to just..." He stopped. "Exist without being needed," she said. He looked at her. "Yeah, that's not a bad thing to say out loud. It feels like one sometimes. Because you think it means you're not..." "I know it doesn't mean I'm not a good father." He said it quickly, which indicated it wasn't the first time he'd argued himself through that logic. "I know. I just..." He exhaled. "I haven't had a lot of practice asking for..." He seemed to weigh the next word. "Space. To be a person who's having a hard time." She thought about her own version of this. The years she'd run the company without telling anyone when something scared her. The specific loneliness of being the person other people relied on to be okay. The way she'd worn competence as insulation against needing anything. "I have a lot of practice with that," she said. "At least, with not doing it well." He looked at her. "I know." They sat with it, the mutual recognition of people who had, in different ways and from different angles, learned the same bad habit. Outside, a woman walked past the window with a large armful of dry cleaning bags draped over one arm and a small boy attached to her other hand who was trying very hard to walk in the opposite direction and the resulting tension was resolved with the weary physics of someone who had won this specific argument before and fully expected to win it again. Sophia and Ethan both watched without comment. "Lily wants to know if you want to come to the school thing," Ethan said. She turned back. "What school thing?" "Her class is doing a science fair. She's growing bean sprouts in different soil types." He had the expression of a man who had heard considerably more than he ever expected to know about bean sprout growth conditions. She wants, her words, a real audience. Her father isn't a real audience? Her father is, again her words, too encouraging to be useful. Sophia laughed. A real one, the unplanned kind. That's harsh. She's not wrong. He said it without any self-pity. I told her the beans look great, and she said that's exactly the problem. When is it? 2 weeks from Saturday. She thought about it for maybe 3 seconds, which was approximately 2.5 seconds less than the situation required if she was being honest with herself about what it meant. I'll come. She'll want you to ask hard questions. I have hard questions about bean sprouts. Do you? No, but I'll think of some. He smiled, the real one. On the walk home, the route that avoided the heaved crack on 4th, which the city had still not fixed, she thought about the shape of the last 2 months. The Carol project, and the second client, and the real bed, and the Thursdays and the Saturdays, and Lily's 2 uneven braids, and the notebook filling slowly with the handwriting of someone who was, against reasonable probability, rebuilding something that might eventually resemble a life. She turned down Maple, and the cold air hit her across the face, and she didn't pull her collar up against it the way she usually did. She just let it. She was 3 blocks from the bakery when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, which usually meant spam, but something made her pick up. One of those small, sourceless hunches she'd learned to occasionally trust. Is this Sophia Bennett? A man's voice. Professional, measured, the tone of someone making a call they'd thought about before making. It is. Who's this? My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm a managing partner at Reyes Logistics Group. We're based in Chicago. A brief pause. I got your name from Carol Tran. She says you're the best operational consultant she's worked with in 10 years, and Carol's opinion carries weight with me. Sophia stopped moving. She was in the middle of the sidewalk, 2 men in coats parting around her with the practiced indifference of city pedestrians. I appreciate that, she said, keeping her voice steady. What kind of work are you looking at? We're mid-acquisition. There's a distribution company in Ohio we're absorbing into our network, and the integration it's a mess, frankly. We need someone who can come in, map the dysfunction, and tell us what we actually have before we're too deep in to back out. Another pause. Carol said you'd want the hard problem. I'm telling you up front, it's the hard one. She started moving again, slowly, her hand firm on the wheel. Tell me about the distribution company, she said. He told her. She listened. The afternoon had gone darker while she'd been walking, the flat gray sky pressing lower, and the streetlights had come on early the way they did this time of year, throwing pale orange circles on the wet pavement, and she wheeled through one and then another, and the man on the phone was still talking, and she was processing everything he said with the specific, focused attention of someone who had just heard, clearly and unmistakably, the sound of a door opening. She got home and sat at the folding table and opened her laptop and opened the notebook to the page that said Bennett Consulting. Restart. She looked at Client 1, Carol Tran, and Client 2, Midwest Precision Manufacturing. She picked up her pen. She wrote, Client 3, Reyes Logistics Group, Acquisition Integration, Chicago. She underlined it once, not twice, because she'd learned the hard way about the distance between a first call and a signed contract, and she wasn't going to let herself run too far ahead. But the underline was there. She looked at it for a long moment in the quiet apartment with the streetlight coming through the window and the real bed behind her in the next room and the city outside going about its complicated evening. Then she opened a new document and started writing her preliminary questions for the Reyes call. She worked for 2.5 hours without stopping, and when she finally pushed back from the table and went to make herself something to eat, she caught her reflection in the dark window over the kitchen sink, her face, her hair, her own expression, and almost didn't recognize the things she saw there. Not because it looked different, exactly, but because for the first time in a long time, it looked like her. The version of her that had started a company at 26 with a used laptop. The version that had written cold emails to strangers at 11 at night and driven to meetings in a city she didn't know yet and built something from components nobody else could see yet. She stood there for a second looking at herself. Then she made the sandwich and went back to work. The Reyes logistics engagement was unlike anything Sophia had taken on since the collapse, and she knew it from the first formal call with Daniel Reyes and his two managing partners, both of whom asked sharp questions in the way of people who had been burned before by consultants who charged a lot and delivered polished-looking nothing. She answered every question directly. She didn't oversell. When they asked something she didn't have the answer to yet, she said so and told them how she'd get it, which she'd learned years ago was worth more in a first meeting than any amount of confident-sounding speculation. Daniel Reyes called back the next morning with a contract. The Ohio distribution company, Heartline Freight, family-owned for 30 years, now being absorbed into Reyes Group's Midwest network, was exactly the kind of operational disaster that looked manageable from the outside and revealed its true depth only after you'd spent a week inside it. The founder's son had been running it for the past 4 years following his father's retirement, and he had the specific quality of someone who'd inherited authority without inheriting the instincts that had built the thing, and had spent 4 years making decisions that felt logical in isolation and were quietly catastrophic in aggregate. 2 of their 3 warehouse systems didn't talk to each other. Their carrier contracts had been renegotiated in ways that made individual sense, but had collectively created a routing inefficiency that was costing them somewhere between 8 and 12% of their operating margin every quarter. Their most experienced dispatch manager had left 6 months ago and taken the institutional knowledge with her. Sophia built the diagnostic in 3 weeks, working 12-hour days from the folding table and 2 video calls per week with the Heartline team, who ranged from cooperative to defensive, depending on how close the questions got to decisions they'd made. She was patient with the defensive ones. She'd learned that patience wasn't softness. It was the thing that got you the information you needed, because people only told you the real version of things when they trusted you weren't going to use it to humiliate them. She delivered the report to Reyes Group on a Thursday morning in early December, on a video call with Daniel Reyes and both managing partners. It was a 31-page document. She walked them through it in 40 minutes and then answered questions for another 20. When the call ended, she sat at the folding table in the quiet of the apartment and let herself feel the specific exhaustion of a thing completed. Not satisfaction exactly. It wasn't finished. There was implementation work still ahead. But the bone-level tiredness of having given something everything and having it hold. She picked up her phone and texted Ethan. Delivered the Reyes report this morning. He texted back inside of 2 minutes, which was fast for him mid-morning. How'd it go? Well, I think. Hard to tell until they've had time to read it. You know it went well. She looked at the message. She looked at the wall. She looked back at the message. Maybe, she typed. And then, before she could decide not to, thank you for the Thursdays. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I should be thanking you. Harold and I would have nothing to talk about. She laughed out loud, alone in the apartment, the sound surprising her with its fullness. Lily's science fair was on a Saturday that arrived cold and clear. The sky, the particular blue that only happened after a hard frost when the air had nothing left in it to be gray. The school was a red brick building 4 blocks from Ethan's house, and he'd given Sophia the address with the careful specificity of a man who had worried, without saying so, about whether the building was accessible, and it was. Ramp at the side entrance, wide hallways, which she'd confirmed herself on the school's website because she'd long since stopped waiting for other people to think of it. The gymnasium had been converted into the kind of organized chaos that elementary school events generated inevitably. 30-some projects on folding tables arranged in rows, hand-lettered signs above each station, children in various states of pride and terror standing beside their work. The smell was gymnasium-specific, floor wax and something sweet from the baked goods table in the corner. She found Lily's station in the 3rd row. Lily had set up 4 small planters, each labeled in careful blocky handwriting: regular soil, sandy soil, clay soil, compost mix. The bean sprouts in each showed different heights and health, ranging from the robust compost mix plants to the struggling clay soil ones, which Lily had documented with photographs taken at 3-day intervals, printed and mounted on a poster board with captions that were considerably more precise than most adults would have managed. Lily saw Sophia coming, and her face did something involuntary and pleased before she locked it back down into the serious expression she was wearing for the event. "You came," she said. "I have questions about your methodology," Sophia said. Lily straightened up visibly. "Okay. Why did you control for water volume, but not for light exposure?" Lily looked at her, then at the project, then back at Sophia with an expression that moved rapidly through several stages. The planters were all on the same shelf. But you had them arranged with the compost planter on the end closest to the window. Lily looked at the photographs. A pause that indicated genuine recalculation happening in real time. "I didn't think about that. It might not have affected the results much, but how would you control for it if you ran the experiment again?" Lily was quiet for a moment, chewing slightly on her lower lip the way Ethan did when he was working something out. "I'd rotate them. Every 3 days, put a different one in the window position." "That's good. Write that down for when they ask you." Lily pulled out a small notebook. She had a notebook, which Sophia found impossibly endearing, and wrote it down without being told twice. Then she looked up. "Dad says you're really good at finding problems." "He said that?" "He said you look at things until you see where they're actually broken, not just where they look broken." She said it in the slightly formal way of a child quoting an adult, the words slightly too big for casual speech, but carried with full sincerity. Sophia looked over at Ethan, who was standing near the baked goods table with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who had just realized he'd been quoted and wasn't sure what the quote had been. "Your dad's pretty observant," she said. "I know." Lily looked at her project. "Are the results actually interesting, or are they just what everyone expected?" "What did you expect?" "That compost would be best." "And it was." "So is it boring?" "No, because you expected it and you proved it. The proof isn't boring just because you suspected the answer beforehand." Sophia looked at the clay soil plants, the ones that had barely made it. "The more interesting question is why the clay plants did so much worse than even the sandy soil ones. Did you have a hypothesis about that?" Lily looked at her poster. Then her eyes went slightly distant in the way of someone who had moved from presenting known answers to actually thinking. "The clay holds water, so maybe it was too wet. The roots couldn't breathe?" "That's called anaerobic conditions. When roots can't access oxygen." Lily wrote anaerobic in her notebook, slowly, sounding it out. "I didn't know that word." "Now you do." Ethan appeared at her elbow with a coffee he'd brought from the table, plain black, which he handed her without comment. And she took it without comment, and Lily looked between the two of them with the particular expression of a 7-year-old who was processing something she didn't have full vocabulary for yet, but was filing away efficiently. "She found a problem with my light control," Lily informed him. "I figured she would." "It's fixable," Sophia said. "I know," Lily said, writing something else in the notebook. They walked to the park afterward, the three of them, following the route Ethan apparently walked with Lily most Saturdays, through the residential blocks and into the long green strip of the park that ran along the river, stripped of its summer green now, but still somehow pleasant in the flat December light. The path was paved and mostly clear, and Sophia wheeled alongside them while Lily walked between them for a while and then ahead of them in the way children did when the adults started talking and they decided there was more interesting business elsewhere. "She liked having you there," Ethan said. "The notebook questions. She's serious about it, that's real." "I know." He said it with the particular note he used for the things about Lily that moved him, the quiet pride that never became performance. "She's been like that since she could talk. She'd rather know the right answer than feel good about a wrong one." "Where did she get that?" He looked ahead at Lily, who was now crouched examining something on the path with the full concentration of a field researcher. "I'd like to say from me, but honestly I think it's just her. It was in her before I taught her anything." Sophia watched Lily pick something up, examine it, put it back exactly where she'd found it. "She's going to be something." "Yeah, simply. She already is." They walked for a while without talking, which they'd gotten good at. The comfortable version of quiet that didn't require filling. A couple passed them with a dog, a large golden thing that tried to visit with Lily and was briefly the most important thing in the world for 30 seconds before Lily moved on. The river was low and slow to their left, its surface catching the winter light in dull pewter flashes. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said. "Go ahead." "The Columbus thing. The other company Marcus Hale hit the same way." He'd remembered it from when she'd mentioned it briefly on a Thursday 2 weeks ago. "Did you follow up on that?" She'd been turning that information over since Carol had told her, the way you turned something over when you weren't sure yet what you were going to do with it. "I made some calls. There's an attorney in Columbus who represented the company that got hit. She reached out to me, actually, after Carol apparently told her I was the one who brought up his name. Her name is Priya Mehta." "What did she say?" "She said she's been looking for additional documented cases. For a civil case." Sophia's hands moved steadily on the wheels, her voice measured. "The pattern matters. One case is a disputed business outcome. Multiple cases with documented similarities is something different." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to do it?" "I'm thinking about it." The honest answer was more complicated than that. She'd been thinking about it in the way you thought about things that required you to go back inside a room you'd worked very hard to get out of. It means going through everything again, the contract, the emails, all of it, formally. "Would it—" He paused, choosing the next word carefully. "Would it fix anything? For you, I mean, not legally, just, I don't know." She said it without pretending otherwise. "Maybe, maybe not." She looked ahead at Lily, who had found a stick and was using it to write something in the mud at the path's edge with focused attention. "What I know is that if there's another company out there right now in the same position I was in 2 years ago, and I have information that could stop it, and I don't give it—" She stopped. "That's its own thing to live with," he finished. "Yeah." He nodded slowly, not performing agreement, but actually thinking about it. "Does it have to be a decision right now? Priya Mehta needs an answer by January." "That's 3 weeks." "I know." They walked another 50 feet in quiet. Lily had finished whatever she'd been writing in the mud and had moved on to examining a tree root that had cracked through the edge of the path, crouching beside it with the same focused expression she'd had at her science project. "Whatever you decide," Ethan said, "you've got the information now. That's already different from before." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You said you went back through the Hale contract and found the 6 places you should have asked different questions. You did that so next time you'd see it coming." He paused. "This Priya Mehta thing isn't about the past. It's another version of the same thing. You have information somebody else needs. That's what you do. You take the information and you figure out what to do with it." She thought about that. She thought about the 31-page Reyes report and the Carol Tran supply chain map and the 3 boxes in the storage unit and the notebook filling with handwriting that was, in its accumulation, the record of a person who had decided to keep going. "You're better at this than you think you are," she said. "At what?" "At the non-practical version." He was quiet for a second, then, "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation." She didn't laugh, but she wanted to. She called Priya Mehta on a Tuesday evening in mid-December, sitting at the folding table with her notebook open and the 3 storage boxes stacked against the wall, lids off, the contents she'd been reorganizing over the past month spread in labeled folders across the floor. Priya Mehta was sharp and efficient and careful with her language, in the way of someone who had been disappointed before by witnesses who changed their minds under the weight of what the process actually required. "I need to be clear about what this involves," Priya said. "It's civil, not criminal, so the standard is lower. But it means depositions. It means his lawyers going through everything you have, and it means you, Sophia, being willing to sit in a room and answer questions about your own decisions, including the ones that didn't protect you." "I know." "A lot of people say they know and then find out they didn't." "I went through the contract myself," Sophia said, 3 times. "I found the 6 places where I asked the wrong questions. I already did the version where I sat in a room with myself and answered for my decisions." She paused. "I can do the formal version." A silence. Then, "Okay." A single businesslike word that contained a recalibration. I'm going to send you a document request. I need anything you have, the partnership agreement, all communications, board minutes if you have them, financial records showing the operational state before and after he became involved. I have it, most of it. Most? There's a gap between October and December of the first year where some emails were on a server that went down with the company. I have printed records of the key communications, but not the full thread. That may be recoverable through his servers, if discovery goes that way. Priya paused. I also need to know, is there anything in your records that reflects badly on your own management? Because I need to know before his lawyers find it. Sophia looked at the folders on the floor, the careful, exhausting months of going through it. Yes. There are 3 decisions I made in the second year that I wouldn't make again. 2 of them he directly advised me toward. One of them was just mine. Good. Good? The fact that you can say that clearly and specifically means you won't be surprised by it. Surprise is what breaks people in depositions. After the call, she sat for a long time on the floor amid the folders, her back against the side of the bed, her legs out in front of her, looking at the paper architecture of a company that had existed and then not existed and was now laid out around her in organized sections like the disassembled parts of something she was figuring out whether to rebuild or just finally, properly bury. Neither, she thought. Neither rebuild nor bury. Just account for. Know what it was. She reached for the Hale Partnership folder and opened it to the first page. The signature at the bottom in his handwriting, the practiced confidence of a man who had signed a lot of documents and felt nothing particular about any of them. Her signature next to it, her real signature, the one she'd had since college, slightly cramped and fast, the signature of someone always moving toward the next thing. She looked at both for a moment. Then she closed the folder and put it in the box marked Meta, Reyes/Docs, and taped it shut with a strip of packing tape and set it aside. Done. That part, at least, was done. The second week of December, Ethan showed up at the bakery on Thursday with a bruise along his left jaw that he had clearly hoped was less noticeable than it was. She looked at it for approximately 1 second before he sat down. What happened? He touched his jaw reflexively, the instinct of someone who'd been hoping it had faded. Job site thing, cabinet door, moving fast in a tight space, miscalculated the clearance. You walked into a cabinet with some velocity. Are you okay? It looks worse than it feels. He said it in the automatic way of a man who'd been told as a child that acknowledging injury was optional. It doesn't hurt much. That's not what I asked. He paused. I'm okay. It was one of those weeks where everything that could go slightly wrong did, and I was moving too fast because I was behind, and I stopped paying attention to my own space. He picked up his coffee. Lily thought it was hilarious, for the record. She made me tell her the whole story twice. Smart girl. She wanted to know if the cabinet was okay. Sophia looked at him. He was tired. Beyond the bruise, she could see it in the way he was holding himself, the particular compression that came from weeks of sustained management without enough rest. She'd seen it building over the past few Thursdays, but it was more pronounced today, and she thought about what he'd told her months ago about sitting in the car in front of the house before going in, and the 5 minutes of just existing. When's the last time you had a day off? She asked. He considered this with more effort than should have been required for the question. I took Lily to her aunt's birthday in October. That's not a day off. That's a different obligation. Construction doesn't really have days off in the same way. Ethan. He stopped. When's the last time you had a day where you weren't doing something for the business or for someone else? He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she had her answer. I don't know how to do that, he said finally, and it cost him something to say it, she could tell. Not the admission of weakness he'd been avoiding, but the simpler and somehow more exposing truth, which was that he'd been running so long on responsibility that the thing it was supposed to be in service of, his own actual life, had become theoretical. I know, she said. I spent 6 years not knowing how to do that either. What changed it for you? She almost said the accident because in the most literal sense that was true. She hadn't had a choice. The body had enforced the pause the way it did when everything else failed to. But that felt like the wrong version of the answer, or at least the incomplete one. I ran out of road, she said. And then I had to figure out what I actually wanted to be doing, not just what I was maintaining the momentum of doing. He looked at his cup. The momentum thing, he said slowly. Yeah. The rain that had been threatening started then, the real kind this time, sudden and decisive against the bakery window, and Lily would have been pleased about that, Sophia thought, the weather finally committing to something. Harold at his newspaper glanced up at the window, then back down, with the equanimity of a man who had made his peace with all weather. Come to dinner, Sophia said. You and Lily, Saturday, I'll cook. She said it before she'd finished deciding to, which was not her usual operating mode, and she felt the slight exposure of it in the 2 seconds before he responded. He looked at her with that quality of attention he had, the full face kind. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. She held his gaze. I want to. Lily can tell me what I'm doing wrong with whatever I make, and I'll write it in my notebook. He was quiet for a second, and she watched something move through his expression, something she'd been watching approach for weeks, some reckoning between the version of himself that managed everything carefully at a distance and whatever was on the other side of that. Okay, he said. Okay. She's going to ask you about the clay soil plants again. I have new questions about the clay soil plants. The rain was coming down hard now, the bakery window running with it in fast, intersecting streams, and the light inside had shifted into the warmer, compressed quality that came when the weather pressed in from outside, and the coffee was still warm, and Harold turned a page, and neither of them moved to go anywhere. She thought about what was in the boxes in her apartment, the meta folder sealed and ready, the client files in their labeled order, the notebook with its accumulating record. And then she stopped thinking about that and just sat in the warm room with the rain and the coffee and the man across from her who had walked into a cabinet and hadn't been in enough pain to stay home, and she thought that this, exactly this, was what she had wished for on a birthday candle in this same room months ago. Not the company, not the resume, not the thing that looked like success from the outside. Just this, just the ordinary morning warmth of not being alone in something. She hadn't named what it was between them, and she wasn't going to name it yet, but she was done pretending it was nothing. She picked up her coffee. Next Thursday, she said. Bring Lily. He smiled. The real one. She'll want a cupcake. The architectural kind? Is there another kind? Outside, the rain fell and the city moved through it in the way cities did. Umbrellas and hoods and that particular urban adaptation to weather that looked like indifference and was actually just very practiced patience. Everyone moving towards somewhere warmer, everyone carrying something. Sophia sat in the bakery window and carried nothing for a minute. It was enough. The dinner on Saturday was pasta, because pasta was the thing Sophia knew she could make without the result being embarrassing, and she'd spent 40 minutes in the grocery store on Friday afternoon selecting ingredients with the specific over-attention of someone who was pretending not to be nervous about something. She'd been in this apartment for 8 months, and no one had eaten a meal here. She'd eaten at the folding table alone, which had been fine, which had been the available thing. Having people over was a different category of event. It required the apartment to be something other than functional, and she'd looked at it Thursday night after coming home from the bakery and made a list of small fixes that she'd executed with methodical efficiency. Saturday morning, not because she needed the apartment to look like something it wasn't, but because she wanted it to look like what it actually was now. A place someone was building something in, not a temporary arrangement she was enduring. She moved the 3 boxes, the meta folder and the client files to the closet. Not to hide the work, but because the work didn't need to be on display. She put the folding table against the wall and added a tablecloth she'd had in a box since before the accident, white with a small blue border, the kind of thing she'd owned for years and used rarely, and now unfolded in the small kitchen space and pressed flat with her hands. Ethan and Lily arrived at 6:15, which was 15 minutes late. Lily was wearing the jacket with the Parasaurolophus pin and carrying a small potted plant, a bean seedling in a plastic cup, the compost mix variety from her science project, which she presented to Sophia at the door with the gravity of a formal gift. It's from the winning planter, Lily said, the compost one. I'll take very good care of it, Sophia said. Come in. Ethan came in behind her with a bottle of wine and the expression of a man navigating a doorway slightly carefully, which she understood as something more than just physical navigation. He was reading the apartment, the space, the way people did when they were being led into something real. He looked around without performing a reaction, which she appreciated. He just looked. "It's good," he said quietly, which was all he said, and it covered everything. Lily had no such restraint. She was immediately interested in everything. The secondhand monitors on the folding table, the stack of notebooks on the shelf, the window over the kitchen sink with the view of the alley, and the lit windows of the building across the way. She stood at that window for a moment looking out, and then turned around with the alert expression of someone who has gathered sufficient data about a new environment. "You can see when the neighbors are home," she said. "That's not exactly why I like it," Sophia said. "But yes. Dad says knowing your surroundings is important." Ethan, in the kitchen doorway, said, "That's not exactly what I said. You said situational awareness. That was in a completely different context." "It still applies," Lily said, with the serenity of someone who has won the argument and is graciously moving on. They ate at the kitchen table, Lily on a chair she'd pulled close enough to reach everything comfortably, Ethan across from Sophia, the wine open and the pasta in the middle. And the conversation was the kind that happened when people had accumulated enough shared history to move easily between subjects without the dead air of people who are still constructing their connection from scratch. Lily held the floor for significant stretches, which she did not do through interruption or volume, but through the simple gravitational pull of being the most genuinely interesting person in the room, a fact that both adults had separately arrived at, and neither felt the need to discuss. She had entered the science fair with the corrected methodology. She'd added the rotation note, as Sophia had suggested, and had been asked about it by two of the judges, and had answered with the specific confidence of someone who has thought the problem through rather than just recited the answer. "Did you win?" Sophia asked. "Second," Lily said with the equanimity of someone who had already processed this and arrived at a fair verdict. Tyler Chen's project was about water filtration with real data from 3 sources. It was legitimately better. She paused. "I'm going to do the same experiment next year with the rotation control and also test pH levels. Then mine will be better." "That's the right response," Sophia said. "I know." She took another bite of pasta. "This is good. The garlic." "Thank you. Dad overcooks pasta sometimes." Ethan said, "I do not." Lily said, "The last time you made pasta, it was..." She made a gesture indicating something that had exceeded its ideal state. "It was fine." "It was soft. Soft is fine. Soft is not al dente." Sophia kept her face neutral with effort. Ethan looked at her with the expression of a man who was living inside a specific kind of beautiful defeat and had made peace with it. After dinner, Lily was given the adult equivalent of permission to explore the apartment, which in practice meant she sat in the corner with Sophia's oldest notebook. Sophia had handed her a blank one, understanding the question before it was asked, and started a list of things she wanted to research about soil pH, while the adults sat with their wine at the cleared table and talked in the quieter register that emerged when Lily's attention had moved elsewhere. "The Mikta case," Ethan said. "You sent the documents?" "Last week. Everything I had." She turned her glass. "Priya says there's now a third company, someone in Atlanta, smaller operation than mine, same structure. The silent partnership entry, the same contract architecture, the same exit sequence. 3 cases. 3 documented. She thinks there are more that settled quietly or just never figured out what happened." She looked at the wine. "Marcus Hale has been doing this for 6 years, apparently. By the time he hit me, he'd done it at least twice before, and nobody had connected the dots." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "And now someone's connecting the dots. Now Priya Mehta is connecting the dots. I'm just one of them." She paused. "The deposition is in February. I'll have to go through everything again in a formal setting and explain my decisions and his decisions and the gap between what the contract said and what actually happened. Are you ready for that?" She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she thought about things that actually mattered. "I think so. I've been through all of it enough times that I'm not surprised by any of it anymore, and..." She stopped. "And?" I think I needed it to be a thing I did, not just a thing that happened to me. She said it slowly, feeling her way into the words. The whole past 2 years, the collapse, the accident, the rebuilding, it was all reactive. I was responding to circumstances, and I did it. I kept going. But the Marcus Hale piece was always the part that I had no agency in. It happened, and I couldn't undo it, and I couldn't answer it. She looked up at him. This is me answering it, even if the case doesn't go perfectly, even if it takes years. I'm in it. He held her gaze for a long moment. That's the version of you that built the company in the first place, he said. The one who doesn't leave things unanswered. She thought about the 26-year-old with the used laptop and the cold call spreadsheet. The woman who'd signed incorporation papers with an Allen wrench still in her jacket pocket. The version of herself she'd seen in the dark kitchen window in November. The one that was still there, that had been there the whole time under everything that had been piled on top of it. Yeah, she said. I think so. From the corner, without looking up from the notebook. I can hear you talking about serious things, Lily said. I don't mind. I just wanted you to know. Ethan looked at the ceiling briefly. Sophia said, Thank you, Lily. You're welcome. A pause. Does compost also improve drainage or just nutrients? Both, Sophia said. The organic material changes the soil structure. It creates more space for water to move through instead of pooling. The pencil scratched in the notebook. Good. That answers the pH question I was going to ask next. January passed in this way January passed in the Midwest, slowly, coldly, with the specific endurance required of months that had no holidays left in them and no particular reason for existing except as the bottom of the year's arc, the place you had to travel through to get to the other side. Sophia worked. She finished the Reyes integration, the formal implementation phase, working with the Heartline team to restructure the carrier contracts and rebuild the warehouse system communication that had been the core of the dysfunction, and the project closed 2 weeks ahead of the timeline she'd set in November. Daniel Reyes called personally to tell her the acquisition had been formally certified by their board as completed and healthy. We'll have more work, he said. We've got 2 more acquisitions scheduled for the second half of next year. I'd like to know you're available. Send me the preliminary scope when you have it, she said. She opened her notebook after the call and looked at the list. Client 1, Carol Tran. Client 2, Midwest Precision Manufacturing. Client 3, Reyes Logistics Group, Acquisition Integration, Chicago. She added, Reyes Group in Phase 2 pending Q3. Then she turned to the back of the notebook where she'd started a different kind of list, not clients, but the shape of the thing she was building, what it needed, what she was doing alone that she'd eventually need another person for. The staffing architecture of something real. Bennett Consulting was not a side project anymore. It was a company, small, lean, operating out of a folding table in an apartment, but real. The revenue from the 3 projects had rebuilt the financial buffer she'd lost, and past that. Not the numbers she'd once had, not yet, but the ground under her was solid in a way it hadn't been in 2 years. She thought about the feature in the regional business magazine. The photo she'd never liked, the smile too wide, the nerves showing through. She thought about what a photo of her right now would look like, at the folding table with the 2 monitors, the notebook open, the bean seedling Lily had given her now 4 inches tall on the windowsill, and thought it would probably be less polished and more accurate than anything she'd been photographed for before. She was 32 years old, and she was still in an apartment she'd moved into after the collapse, and the recovery was real, and it was also incomplete, and both of those things were true simultaneously, and she'd made her peace with the fact that they would be for a while. The wholeness she'd been reaching toward wasn't a destination she'd arrived at. It was a direction she'd been traveling in since a Tuesday morning in September when she'd pushed through the door of a bakery she couldn't afford and found, unexpectedly, that the world had not finished with her yet. The deposition was on a Thursday in February, which meant no bakery that week. And Ethan had texted her the night before, You'll be fine. She'd texted back, I know. Then, after a minute, I know it might not go perfectly. I'll be fine anyway. He'd replied with a single period, which, in their shared shorthand, had come to mean I hear you, and I'm not going to over-respond to that. It was an unusual punctuation mark to find comforting, but she did. The deposition lasted 4 hours in a conference room in a law building downtown. Marcus Hale's attorney across the table from her, and Priya Mehta beside her, and it was everything Priya had told her it would be. Structured to unnerve, full of questions designed to get her to overqualify, or understate, or lose the thread of what she'd actually experienced and known and decided. She answered everything directly. When she didn't know something, she said she didn't know. When the attorney tried to suggest that her own management decisions had been the primary factor in the collapse, she said, "Some of my decisions contributed to the conditions. His decisions and the misrepresentations in the partnership agreement created the structure those conditions occurred in. I can distinguish between those two things clearly, and I'd like you to let me do so on the record." Priya had been still beside her, not tense, still. The stillness of someone whose preparation has just proved sufficient. After, in the parking lot, Priya said, "You were good." "I was ready," Sophia said. It wasn't modesty or bravado, just the accurate description. She had been ready because she'd done the work of being ready. The 4 a.m. nights with the folders and the notebook and the document she'd written for herself months ago. 6 questions asked wrong. And all the time she'd gone through it until she wasn't surprised by any of it anymore. "There will be more," Priya said. "This isn't over. I know, but this part is done." She drove home. She'd started driving again 4 months ago, an adapted vehicle she'd saved for the first major purchase of the rebuilding phase. And she sat in the parking lot of her building for a few minutes, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she'd promised herself she'd take the 5 minutes, the thing Ethan had described on a Thursday morning that she'd stored carefully. Just 5 minutes to exist without being needed. She sat in the quiet car and looked at the building and breathed. Then she went inside and called her mother. Her mother listened to the whole thing. The deposition, the 4 hours, the attorney across the table, the question about her management decisions, and how she'd answered it. She listened without interrupting, which was her way, and when Sophia finished, there was a brief silence, and then her mother said, "You told the truth." "Yes. Even the hard parts. Especially those." "Okay." That was all. Just okay, in the way her mother had always said okay, not as dismissal, but as the verbal equivalent of putting a hand on someone's shoulder and pressing once and letting go. The compressed version of, "I hear you, and I'm proud of you, and you don't need me to say it at length." "Are you eating?" "Yes, Mom." "And that man, Ethan." Sophia paused. "What about him?" "You've mentioned him approximately 17 times since October and then say, 'anyway,' and change the subject." "I do not." "The last 3 phone calls." She sat on the edge of the real bed, the frame she'd assembled herself, and looked at the ceiling. "It's complicated." "Why is it complicated?" "Because it's important and I don't want to get it wrong." Her mother was quiet for a moment. "Baby," she said, in a tone Sophia associated with being 12 years old and receiving wisdom she didn't have the framework for yet, "the fact that you don't want to get it wrong is exactly why you probably won't." After the call, she sat on the bed for a while longer, thinking about what her mother had said, and not thinking about it, the two activities running alongside each other the way they did with things that were both true and terrifying in equal measure. She picked up her phone and texted Ethan, "Deposition done, 4 hours." "I'm okay," he replied inside 1 minute. "Come to dinner, I'm cooking, and before you say anything, the pasta will be al dente." She laughed out loud in the empty apartment. "What time?" she typed. 7. "Lily wants to tell you something about pH levels." "I have new questions about pH levels." "Of course you do. See you at 7. She got there at 7, and the pasta was in fact al dente, which Ethan mentioned with the specific satisfaction of a man who had been proven right about something he hadn't fully believed he'd be right about. Lily was at the kitchen table when Sophia arrived, the blank notebook Sophia had given her in December now half filled, and she looked up with an expression that was trying very hard to be casual and not quite making it. "I found something," Lily said. "Tell me." "Sandy soil has better drainage but lower nutrient retention. Clay soil has worse drainage but higher nutrient retention. But if you mix them in a controlled ratio, She turned the notebook to show Sophia a hand-drawn chart, careful and precise, the columns labeled with a ruler. You can potentially get both. Better drainage than clay, better nutrients than sand. It's called loam. Professional farmers use it. Sophia looked at the chart. It was the work of someone who had taken a single question, what's wrong with the clay soil plants? And followed it back through the problem until she understood the underlying system, not just the symptom, the whole thing. Who taught you about loam? Sophia asked. I looked it up. She said it simply, like the most obvious thing. Lily. Sophia looked at her. This is good science. What you did here, following the question all the way back to the root, that's the whole thing. That's the method. Lily looked at the chart and then at Sophia, and she was 7 years old, and she didn't quite have the vocabulary yet for what it meant to have someone look at your work and tell you it was the real thing, rather than the child version of the real thing, but she felt it. Sophia could see it in her face, the way it settled, the way she sat slightly taller without being aware of it. I'm going to redo the experiment with loam as a fifth variable, Lily said. Tell me what you find. From the stove, without turning around. Can I be part of this conversation, or is this a science thing I'm excluded from? You can be part of it if you understand what loam is, Lily said. It's mixed soil. Specifically, it is a mixture of sand, silt, and clay in a ratio that optimizes for both drainage and nutrient retention. A silence. Lily looked at Sophia. He looked it up, Lily said. I'm not embarrassed by that, Ethan said, bringing plates to the table. Sophia looked at him, and he looked back at her over Lily's head, the shared look of two people who have been finding each other on the other side of small and large things for months. And she thought about her mother saying the fact that you don't want to get it wrong is exactly why you probably won't. And she thought about the birthday candle in September, and the wish she'd made. Not the big things, not the company and the resume and the legs, but the small true thing. I want one day where I feel like I'm going to be okay. She'd been having those days, she realized. Not consistently, not without hard days in between, but regularly. In the bakery with the coffee, in the park with the frost blue sky, at the dinner table with the pasta and the notebook and the person across from her who had first appeared as a man in a gray t-shirt holding 2 cups of coffee, looking slightly uncertain, saying, I'm going to start over. Hi, I'm Ethan. They ate and the evening moved in the way evenings did when they were going well. Not dramatically, not in the shape of a story, just warmly. The time passing without either party wanting it to move faster. Lily fell asleep on the couch at 9:15 with the open notebook on her chest, the pencil still in her hand, and Ethan lifted the notebook carefully and set it on the coffee table and put a throw blanket over her with the fluency of someone who had done this 10,000 times, who had built this specific knowledge of one specific person through years of repetition. And there was something in watching it, the absolute unshowy practicality of it, that Sophia felt more clearly than anything beautiful she'd ever been shown deliberately. She thought, this is what love looks like when it's doing its actual work. Not the beginning, not the declarations. The blanket at 9:15. Ethan came back to the kitchen doorway and looked at her, and she looked at him and neither of them said anything for a moment. I want to tell you something, she said. Okay. She looked at her hands on the table, the capable hands, the ones that still worked, the ones that had typed the proposals and turned the wheels and pressed flat against surfaces in the dark to feel the ground under her. I've been careful this whole time, with all of it, with the rebuilding and the clients and the case, and she stopped. With this, I know. I don't regret that. The careful. I needed the careful. She looked up at him. But I think I've been careful past the point where it's still protecting me and into the point where it's just keeping distance for its own sake. He didn't move. He was leaning in the doorway with his arms folded, not defensively, just the posture of a man who had stopped moving because something worth listening to was happening. The day we met, she said, I was holding a $1 bill in a bakery I couldn't afford, on my birthday, alone. And you put money on a table instead of handing it to me because you understood, somehow, that the difference mattered. She paused. That's who you are. That's been who you are every Thursday for 6 months, and every Saturday, and every text about pasta, and every time you've said something that was actually the right thing without making a performance of it. She exhaled. I don't want to be careful about you anymore. The apartment was quiet. From the living room came the soft sound of Lily's breathing, the small, rhythmic evidence of a child asleep, who trusted completely that the world was safe while she was unconscious. Ethan pushed off the doorway and came to the table and sat down across from her and looked at her for a long moment without filling it. I've been waiting, he said finally, for you to get there. I wasn't going to push. I knew you needed to get there in your own time. He said it without resentment, just fact. But I've been... Yeah. He stopped. He tried again. The Thursday you told me to come back, the first one. I went home and I sat in the car for 20 minutes. The 5-minute thing. It was 20 that day. She looked at him. He looked back. I'm not the same person I was on that birthday, she said. I know. I watched you become this one. She's better, she said. Not easier, but better. Yeah, he said. She is. It wasn't the full conversation. There were things they still had to say to each other, the kind that required more than one evening and the proper occasion, the mutual acknowledgement of what they each carried and how two carried things worked alongside each other without becoming each other's weight. Those conversations were ahead of them, not behind, and she knew that and was not afraid of it. She'd been through enough to know that the thing worth having was rarely the thing that arrived without work. But this was the start of the honest version. She was done with the careful version. Spring came the way spring always came in the Midwest, gradually and then suddenly, the temperature crossing some invisible threshold and the whole city changing register overnight, the park trees pushing out their first unreliable green and the light going long and golden in the afternoons in a way that was physically different from the winter light, warmer in the molecular sense, landing on surfaces and staying there instead of just glancing off. Sophia signed a lease on a real office space in April. Not large, one room with good light and enough space for 2 proper desks, and a conference table that could seat 6, but real, the kind of space that required a key and a utilities account and a sign by the buzzer that she'd ordered online and installed herself on a Saturday morning while Ethan held the level and Lily sat on the floor examining the wall's baseboard trim with the interest of a person who had recently learned about building materials and was now applying this knowledge universally. The sign said, Bennett Consulting. Just that. Not Bennett Digital Solutions. Not the old name, not the attempt to recreate what had been. The new name, which was also her name, which was also just a description of what she actually did. Clean, direct, no flourish. She stepped back and looked at it. The level was off by about a degree on the left side, which she considered correcting and then left, because she had learned in the past year that perfect levelness was not the same as functional, and she was not going to spend her reopening morning arguing with a drill. Looks right, Ethan said. It's slightly off. It's within tolerance. Lily looked up from the baseboard. Tolerance is the acceptable margin of variation in a measurement, she said. We learned about it. Where? Sophia asked. Dad's job sites. She went back to the baseboard. They measure things a lot. She had 4 clients now, the 4th being a referral from Daniel Reyes to a regional grocery distribution company that had a warehouse efficiency problem Sophia had immediately recognized as the kind she could solve. She had a part-time operations coordinator, a woman named Janet who'd worked in supply chain for 15 years before taking time off for family and was now back and good, and understood without Sophia having to explain it what it meant to be rebuilding something from a real foundation rather than an assumed one. She had, in the most literal sense, a company again. Different shape, different scale. Built this time with the knowledge of where the joints were, where the load-bearing decisions were, what the 6 questions looked like that you had to ask before you signed anything. The meta case was moving, slowly, as legal things moved, but with the accumulating weight of 3 documented victims and a paper trail that Priya had described, in her measured lawyer's language, as substantial. Marcus Hale had retained 2 attorneys and made 1 early offer of settlement that Priya had advised Sophia to decline, which she had. Not because the money wasn't real, it was, but because the settlement would have required confidentiality clauses that would have made it impossible to continue warning people about the pattern. She wanted the pattern on record. She wanted the next person who Googled his name to find something. She told Ethan this on a Thursday in May, in the bakery, at their table by the window. Harold at his newspaper 2 tables over, spring light coming through the glass in the warm, honey-colored way it had on the morning they'd met. The settlement would have been cleaner, she said. Financially. But I've been thinking about what you said a long time ago, about the Walker and Sons name, about the weight being the point. She looked at her coffee. If I take the quiet settlement and move on, I'm doing the thing I did the first time, managing the outcome without changing the conditions that created it. She paused. I'm not interested in managing it anymore. I'm interested in changing it. He looked at her for a long moment. That's going to take longer, and it's going to be harder. I know. You know. I've been uncomfortable before. I'm reasonably good at it. He smiled. You're excellent at it. From outside came the sound of the city on a May morning, traffic and voices and someone's music from an open car window, a child somewhere laughing at something with the unselfconscious totality that children brought to finding things funny. And it came through the glass as a kind of ambient warmth, the world operating at its ordinary frequency, which Sophia had learned to find on her better days, genuinely sustaining. She had not arrived at some uncomplicated peace. Her legs still didn't work the way they used to, and they never would, and she still had days when that fact hit her fresh, even though she'd been living inside it for 2 years. The grief cycling back around in the way grief did, not as constant weight, but as periodic ambush. She still had nights when the anxiety about the business came at her in the small hours, the specific fear of someone who had built something and lost it before and could not entirely trust that history wouldn't repeat. She still had moments of loneliness that the presence of good people in her life didn't fully dissolve, because loneliness wasn't always about the absence of people. Sometimes it was just the reminder that the interior of a life was ultimately private and not entirely shareable. She was not fixed. She was not the after picture of a story about overcoming. She was a person who had been broken in several ways at once and had gotten up, slowly and imperfectly, and with help, she'd been stubborn about accepting and had built something real out of the remaining materials. That was the thing, she thought. That was what she would want anyone to take from the shape of the past year if she were ever the kind of person who told her own story, which she mostly wasn't. Not that it turned out fine, not that the bad thing led to the good thing in some tidy causation, just that the remaining materials were always more than they looked like. The used laptop and the invoice template and the cold call spreadsheet. The specific modest truth of what you still had when everything else was gone. That thing was enough to start with. It always had been. She had started with $1. But September came back around with its cooler light and the bakery's birthday cakes in the display case, and a particular Tuesday morning that Sophia did not fully recognize as meaningful until she was already in the middle of it. She'd been up early, the habit unchanged from the hard months, and she'd worked for an hour at the proper desk in the real office 4 blocks from the apartment. She walked it every morning now, the route that still passed the heaved crack on 4th Street that the city had actually finally fixed in July, which had produced in her an unreasonable satisfaction she'd described to Ethan, and he'd understood completely. She worked, and then she went to the bakery because it was Thursday, and that was where she went on Thursdays. And she got there first for once and ordered the coffees, 2, both black, and sat at the table by the window and waited. He came in at 9:53, the bell above the door. The gray t-shirt that was a different gray t-shirt, but somehow the same garment in the taxonomy of his wardrobe, the slightly longer than it should be hair, the expression that shifted when he saw her and the coffees and moved into the real smile, the one that arrived slightly ahead of everything else. He sat down and picked up the cup. "Happy birthday," he said. She looked at him. She'd forgotten. She had actually genuinely forgotten, which would have been unimaginable a year ago, the birthday that had been the defining fact of the worst morning she could remember. "I forgot," she said. "I know, I can tell." "That's... huh." She looked at the display case where the birthday cakes sat in their usual positions, the white fondant one with the gold lettering, same as always, or a new version of always, she couldn't tell. "That's strange. Is it bad?" She thought about it. She thought about this dollar bill, smooth and soft from the bottom of her bag, flattened against her thigh. She thought about the wish, the small true one. I want one day where I feel like I'm going to be okay. She thought about the year between that wish and this morning, all the Thursdays and the notebook pages and the folders, and the 4-hour deposition, and the sign by the buzzer, and the bean seedling on the windowsill that was now 10 inches tall and slightly straggly, because she was, it turned out, an inconsistent waterer, but a committed one. No, she said. It's not bad. She looked out the window at the September street, a woman with a stroller, 2 teenagers on bikes, a man in a yellow coat walking a small white dog, an ordinary Tuesday morning in an ordinary city doing its ordinary thing. And she thought about how much had happened and how slowly and how completely and how it hadn't looked like a story from the inside, just like days, one after another, each one requiring the thing the previous one had left her with. That was the whole of it, she thought. Not the comeback, not the arc, just the continuation, the stubborn, imperfect daily decision to keep using what you had. She picked up her coffee. Lily wants to come Saturday, Ethan said. She has phase 2 loam data. I want to see the data. She made graphs. With a ruler? With a ruler and a protractor. I don't know where she learned about protractors. I may have mentioned them once. He looked at her. Of course you did. Outside, Harold arrived, the newspaper under his arm, and settled into his usual table with the ritual ease of someone who had decided a long time ago that consistency was its own form of comfort. And Sophia watched him arrange his paper and his cup and thought that she understood that now in a way she hadn't before, the value of the repeated thing, the returning, the choosing to come back to the same place and finding it still there. She was 33 years old today, and she had a company with a sign and a part-time coordinator and 4 clients and a real bed and a bean seedling and a notebook that was almost full and a 7-year-old who sent her soil science data and a man across the table who had put money down instead of handing it to her on the morning that had turned out to be the last morning of the old version of her life. She had $1 to her name that day, and she had spent it, and it had been exactly enough. Some things, she thought, not neatly, not as wisdom, just as the accumulated understanding of someone who had been to the bottom of her own resources and found the floor. Some things you don't actually need to fix. You need to outlast them. You need to stay in the room with them until they become the past instead of the present. And then you need to keep going, not because everything gets better in the ways you planned, but because keeping going is the only method that has ever actually worked, for anyone, in the whole complicated history of people trying to make something of what they've been given. She had been given very little at the start of a September morning a year ago. She had made something of it. The coffee was warm, the light was good. Ethan was saying something about Lily and the protractor, and she was listening, and the city was doing its thing outside the window, and she was here, in it, present in the way she hadn't been in years, not managing it, not defending against it, not enduring it, just in it. That was enough. It had always been enough. She just hadn't known how to hold on to it before she'd learned what it cost to lose it. She picked up her coffee with both hands, and she was warm all the way through.